What was the incident at your school? This one kid was constantly bullied by a group of rednecks. One day when he was at McDonald's, they showed up and started taunting him and berating him, and so he left and went to the Tractor Supply store next door. So he's walking around and they followed him and started taunting him again and just being dicks. Next thing you know, the bullied kid picks up an axe from the aisle and hits the leader of the bullies in the face. Everyone called it the accident. Edit, posted article, then removed it because bad idea. I went to Catholic school, and so we had a school chaplain who was essentially some sort of friend to the kids. It sounds really creepy when you say it like that, but the dude was fucking amazing. He talked multiple students out of suicide, helped tons of kids come to terms with and overcome bullying, harassment and sexual domestic abuse, as well as encouraging every single student to reach for their dreams. Anyway, he once went the extra mile for a very troubled family at my school. The two kids in question were adopted brothers and both incredibly unstable. The brothers would be your best friend one second, and they suddenly fly off the handle the next, making you literally fear for your life. Anyway, knowing their family problems, the school chaplain volunteered to become the two boys' godfather in order to legally be able to help them and their family out financially. About a year after I finished school, the school chaplain appeared in the local newspapers. He had been arrested and imprisoned for raping the older of the two lads. For most people that was enough to condemn him, but most of the people I went to school with found the whole thing to be somewhat suspicious. Whenever someone encountered one of the two boys, they would instantly launch into a step-by-step recount of what exactly happened, as if desperate to convince everyone they knew that they were telling the truth. The only thing wrong was that these step-by-step recounts were usually vastly different each time they were told, as if poorly thought out. Regardless, the chaplain imprisoned and eventually died of cancer while still inside. It was only after his death that it finally came out that the rape never happened. The chaplain had run into financial trouble himself and so was unable to keep giving the boys' family money. As punishment, the whole family, yes, the parents were the ones who came up with the idea, invented the rape story to teach him a lesson. The guy was a fucking hero. He even helped my girlfriend at the time get through her parents' divorce in one piece, and yet his lot in life wound up with him sad, forgotten and alone. Edit, chaplain, not chaplain XD. Holy fuck, this is one of the saddest things I've ever read. Awesome sounding guy. Those bastards better be in jail for perjury right now. I feel so awful for that chaplain. I hope he's at peace now. In elementary, we had 3 students that had to go out and empty the compost in the afternoon. One day my 2 friends and I were disposing of the compost outside and we seen a guy carrying a shotgun, which happened to be loaded, we didn't know, literally down the road beside the school. My friends and I thought he was probably just going duck hunting, so we went over and talked to him. He was a pretty chill guy. When we went inside the school, everybody was hiding underneath the desks and the school was in lockdown due to an armed man walking around the school with intent to kill. I was scared shitless at the thought of such a man, not realizing I had just had a 5-minute convo with him about hunting. The next day we all found out that the armed man broke into a house down the road and shot somebody. TLDR, school went into lockdown and my friends and I were hanging out with the gunman. How exactly did that conversation go? Hey mister, nice gun yet? Thanks kiddo. Homicide ensues. Former South African SAS, now high school tech teacher, ripped his shirt off and confronted a gang member that had come onto school grounds with a knife to take out a student with connections to a rival gang. Tech teacher wraps his torn shirt around his hand and grabs the knife while punching the gang member in the head with the other hand, knocking him out cold. All at lunchtime with half the school watching. Absolute fucking legend. My freshman year of HS, a senior oiled himself down with grapeseed oil and boyed through the fully packed lunchroom. He went up to a table maybe 20 feet from me and put his dong on a girl's back before making his way to the other side of the cafeteria to be tasered in front of 400 plus people. Edit, cops taser student running naked through high school cafeteria. Fox News webpage. Police said an administrator ordered Killian to stop, but the student made a sexual gesture toward him and kept running. When I was in high school we had an outdoor discovery class that was basically just a giant ropes course. The teacher for that class was a nice middle-aged man. One day he decided to take a shower in the locker room between periods and had a stroke. Now I don't know what about this stroke was different, but it made him decide he needed to go for a jog around the high school and middle school, naked as the day he was born. So he's been naked, sprinting past classroom windows in just his socks and sneakers, which he somehow thought to put on, when a sub goes outside to see what's going on when the outdoor teacher runs over and basically starts playing a game of catch me if you can until the ambulance arrives. It was a very odd day, but he was back to work a couple weeks later, making kids swing from ropes and climb over logs like normal. Edit, just saw I got a bunch of replies. To clarify, no, he was not a druggie and didn't go on a bender. He was an older man, outdoorsman, healthy and didn't give off any kind of drug vibe. It is possible, as some have pointed out, that he had an underlying condition that somehow got triggered and led to this. He was a nice guy even after this happened, probably a little embarrassed about everyone seeing his birthday suit, but he carried on. This is my favorite story on here. Did he say anything to the students about it when he came back, or did he just try to act like nothing had happened? Did not mention it. All the teachers had their own explanation, but it was basically the same. Don't ever mention it to him. He got paranoid after that though. Always thought people were talking about him. Usually were. Had the wise ass commenting peers like usual, blurting out stuff. Jeremy Dull shot himself in class and Pearl Jam wrote a song about it. 5H, Richardson teenager kills himself in front of classmates webpage. Weird fact blog webpage. I was in the counselor's office in the hall beneath where it happened. The gunshot sounded like someone dropped a stack of books. It wasn't until a girl ran screaming down the hall that people realized something horrible had happened. My cousin was in the classroom when it happened. He doesn't really like to talk about it though. My freshman year of college, our dean of admissions was arrested for forcing Chinese foreign students to do manual labor at her house under threat of revoking their student status. While awaiting trial for slavery, she tried to burn her house down for the insurance money. When that didn't work, she killed herself. Edit, proof, Nimag webpage. Just a little funny thing. In high school we moved into a brand new building right during Christmas break. All the doors were the safety ones that had self-closers on them, so every door had one of those triangle wood blocks you could use to keep the door open. A couple friends, and maybe myself, started collecting them and putting them in an unused locker. It started slow at first, but in a couple weeks we had people we didn't even know giving them to us. After another week or so of this and we have the locker almost full. We assumed the wood shop was knocking out more of them as they were being lifted, and that's why we had so many. The principal finally did an announcement about it, and since the locker was full we decided to drop an anonymous note that essentially took the staff on a hunt with riddles, taking them to different locations with the final stop the locker with our bounty in it. We assumed they tracked them down because the next time we checked the locker it was empty. We guessed they had a shelf in a storage room somewhere with a bunch of these door stops sitting on them since they had made so many more. These stories typically end with someone getting fired or expelled, but this one ended with a nice treasure hunt. Quaint. Ha ha. That's a perfect prank actually. Not harmful, but frustrating and well executed enough to be great. Someone stole a urinal from one of the boys' bathrooms in high school. All year the principal went on about how if we knew anything we should come forward because we must stop the bathroom bandits. Of course no one came forward because once the bathroom bandits had a name they became legend. I never did find out who they were, but someone found the urinal 3 years later, hidden under some stairs behind the auditorium, a good distance from the bathroom it was taken from. How the fuck do you remove a urinal without making a complete mess with all this water? You can remove a urinal with a big slip joint, pliers or crescent wrench and a standard screwdriver. There's a small screw on the banjo fitting coming out of the wall. Remove that screw and this provides access to the shut-off valve. Use your standard screwdriver and turn the valve clockwise to turn off the water. Use the wrench to loosen the plumbing joints and to remove the retaining bolts holding the urinal against the wall. Lift the urinal from the bottom and pull it away from the wall. Edit. Forgot that some urinal fixtures have the shut-off valve exposed. It just looks like a brass standard screw. If you see that it's the shut-off valve. One day in gym class all the males left gym and went to see this massive shit someone left in the men's room. It was so huge it clogged the toilet itself without the use of any paper. One of the guys tried to flush it and it seemed to just make a huge suction until thump it all went down in one go. Everyone left and returned to gym. Then, it happened again. Basically the same thing. Administrator of our school had an assembly saying that all the boys needed to flush the toilets and that the hallways smelled like shit. One of the male teachers standing behind me at the assembly said you couldn't flush it, it was as big as your arm. Edit. Thanks for the gold. This happened in Pennsylvania. The teacher that made the arm comment was a Swedish guy in charge of our art program at the school. Ex-football player. Creating shits are mind-boggling. Players would drop one in the locker room bathroom, then have battles on whose was bigger. The poster above me is not kidding about the size of an arm. Holy shit. Almost the exact same thing happened my junior year. This goofy redneck kid took a shit so big that it covered up the entire hole, and faculty had to come remove the monstrosity by hand. Good thing I got to see it before they took it away. That shit was life-changing. At one of our grad parties a grade 11 kid locked himself in the bathroom. After some time passed and the line grew, the party host knocked on the door and said he's going to unlock the door with a nail in 30 seconds. By sticking the nail in that hole in the center of the knob, the door opened and the kid was naked and flogging his dolphin. His sister, who was also at the party, was so embarrassed she dragged him out and started to wrap up and berate her naked younger brother. Through his tears and his sister's yelling he said that he'd never even been kissed before. He turned out alright though. He couldn't just stop. Also, my younger brother had a stuffed dolphin toy that he named something stupid that a 5-year-old would name a toy. The name escapes me. Anyways, my dad decided to start calling it Floggin'. It went way over me and my brother's heads. I love remembering adult jokes that I didn't realize were jokes at the time. My junior year in high school I went to one of the formal dances. My date was friends with my buddy's date, so I picked him up first and then we were going to head over to the girls' houses. As we are leaving his house, his stepdad asks if he remembered his raincoat. Without missing a beat, my buddy says it's not going to rain. I honestly thought nothing of it until years later when I watched an older movie where raincoat was used as slang for a condom. I still chuckle to this day thinking about that. One Friday afternoon some kids played football in the schoolyard. Schoolyards are generally the only places here where you can play football here. Some older kids came, threatened the younger kids who played, and the younger ones ran away. Then the younger kids returned, back with some older kids, baseball bats and brass knuckles. It was one of the most violent scenes in the city in years. This caused the city council to lock all schools and other public places that have football basketball fields the entire weekend, every weekend. This was an ongoing thing, I guess you could call a series of incidents, but shit hit the fan the year after I graduated. One of the teachers, teacher number 1, was found to have been having an ongoing relationship with an 18-year-old student. Not really that crazy, I mean it is, but you hear about stuff like that all the time. The crazy part is what they uncovered while investigating teacher number 1. Another teacher, teacher number 2, was found to also have been having sex with students. Multiple students. 16 of them, to be exact. Spanning over the course of his entire career, somewhere between 15 and 20 years. Apparently he would pick a new girl every year or so, groom her, and have a relationship with her until she graduated and he moved on to someone else. He had one of them, voluntarily, as in she was not technically kidnapped but went there on her own accord, living in his basement and they would go on vacations together. Once the news about him came out, everyone went wild. They also found a third teacher, teacher number 3, while investigating number 2. Teacher number 3 was a substitute that would buy underage girls alcohol in exchange for oral sex. All 3 were subsequently arrested and serving sentences in jail. A grand jury investigation found that the school board members, including the superintendent and the principal at the high school, all knew about teacher number 2's ongoing behavior, as there was numerous reports about it through the years. But there was a culture of "we gotta protect each other" and the school's reputation, and nothing was done about it. The superintendent of the school board resigned, but now for some reason has been put back onto the school board, and the cycle will continue. TLDR, teachers banging students for like 20 years at my school, and the school covered it up. In college, we had the poop bandit. Less one incident and more a string of them. Some of his exploits: 1. Shit in the washers in the men's freshman dorm. They were all top loaders and not many checked them. He'd shit in a random one every couple of weeks. 2. Left pizza boxes in the co-ed dorm common areas with shit in them. Set it up so that it looked like, hey, free pizza. 3. Forced the elevator door open in the co-ed dorm a floor above the elevator and shit on top. It took a week for anyone to figure out why the elevator stank. Poop bandit. There's a green text Imgur web page for that. A literal bomb was dropped in my school playground. We lived in Yuma aside the Air Force Base, and there were constant training and testing exercises. Often they dropped dummy bombs into the proving grounds to practice accuracy. Well, one day, a rookie accidentally dropped a dummy into our school playground at 5 in the morning. Military went in to collect it and realized that some idiot had loaded a real bomb into the plane that morning, and what was laying there could have caused quite a crater. School called everyone and said school was cancelled for the day. I'm not too sure what happened to the trainee or the person who loaded the bomb. It's an entertaining story to tell though. This seems like some Back to the Future type shit. How often do real bombs not explode? Edit. Seems people knowledgeable on the subject have replied with an explanation. Edit 2. Now my most rated post ever, narrowly beating out a submission in r/2007 scape about player harassment, and another in r/Emma about how I executed an entire family of baby bunnies because my parents are filthy liars. Probably didn't explode because it was loaded as a dummy and thus wasn't fused or had arming wire attached. Ammunition like that is fairly inert without a good explosive train to set it off. If you had a system set up for an inert bomb, the aircraft wouldn't fuse a real bomb properly, at least in most aircraft I know. So the bomb wasn't going to explode, probably, unless the pilot also thought it was a live bomb. While I was a sophomore, a group of seniors had too many beers one Friday night and decided it would be a great idea to go burn down the rival school's football stadium. In a drunken stupor, they managed to torch the press box before giving up. The next morning the rival school's staff discovered their football field covered in empty beer cans and abandoned gasoline canisters, all covered with fingerprints. When I was about 15, the school won some kind of grant, and spent somewhere north of $20 million on a new technology suite, with 6 computer rooms with super high-end PCs, a brand new server room for the school, 2 music technology AV suites, a video production suite, and a new theater. The night before it was due to open, a group of students broke in, doused the place in kerosene, and torched it. Whole building was destroyed, but the kids didn't get caught. Fortunately the insurance paid out, and they spent over a year rebuilding the place. 2 weeks after it opened, the same group of students, probably thinking if they've gotten away with it once they can get away with it again, torched the place a second time. This time they did get caught, but sadly the insurance company refused to pay out twice in a row, so the school never got their new tech suite. I've posted this before, but I figured these threads could always use some more positive stories. My high school was relatively free from bullying, but the biggest hullabaloo surrounded a mildly autistic student we had who was the subject of some tormenting from his classmates. Some jackoffs figured out they could make him lose his cool by repeatedly clicking their pens and then acting like they couldn't hear it. It got so bad he had to leave class crying. Our history teacher, whom the whole school liked, went on to become principal, went door to door in every classroom to explain to the students what was going on. Rather than talk about bullying, he simply told us that he had thought better of us and was very disappointed to be proven wrong. Sometime the next week someone was clicking the pens again to rile the poor student up when quarterback of our football stood up, walked over to the kid doing the clicking, took his pens, books, and backpack and threw it all in the garbage before returning to his seat. The English teacher leading the class acted like they hadn't seen a thing. The bullying stopped after that. Not a juicy scandal, but I figured I'd contribute a more positive story amidst all the student-teacher fucking. Our entire offensive line of the football team came up with the idea to rob a local franchise restaurant in shop class. One of the kids worked there, and the rest came in with airsoft guns, assaulted an elderly man, held their friend up, he was in on it. They took the proceeds, had dinner at Applebee's, and divided up the rest amongst the co-conspirators. They were tracked down easily because they used the kid who had 32 scholarship offers, brand new Denali with chrome rims and custom tinted windows. One went to jail, the others were put on probation, and all the schools rescinded their offers. I was happy because about 2 weeks before this went down they pulled up next to my middle school-aged brother and dumped a 2-liter of orange soda on his head. Oh, and after the cost of dinner, they each got $6 apiece. The thing was, these kids were the aberration when it came to the football team. Everyone else on the team was super nice, went out of their way to help disabled students and shut down anyone who was bullying others. Other than the shitty ones mentioned above, the football players were well known for being an approachable group who did the right thing, and they would go out of their way to help others in need. One thing that stands out is that senior year they waged a campaign to make sure a special needs kid got on the homecoming court after having a really rough couple of months with his parents divorcing. They even carried him in on their shoulders after it was announced he had won a spot. I'm pretty sure the kid was on suicide watch for a time, and, for the rest of the year, the team made it their mission to make sure he had a proper group of support and to include him in as many things as they could. That in their record was like 8-1. When there are well over 1,000 students in each grade, the popular ones aren't the exclusive non-awkward teens who beat up on the weak, but the ones who go out of their way to be awesome people. Talk about a small payout. I'm sure the kid with scholarship offers looked at that $6 and thought, hell yeah. He stroked that $6 as the local GMC lot repossessed his Denali with the chrome rims and custom tinted windows. Hell yeah, he whispered to the wrinkled bills. Hell yeah. This isn't uncommon. I was on the football team and one of the strongest players too. Before puberty I got bullied a lot because I was fat. If I ever caught little pissons bullying other kids in high school I'd tell them to back the fuck off. None of my football buddies were bullies. I mostly remember bullies being trashy little fuckers that would feel cool for picking on the smallest kids in school. I have no idea where the jocks are asshole bullies stereotype comes from, because I went to 6 different high schools. Long story, but Hurricane Katrina really fucked high school up, and I played sports at 4 out of the 6 and never witnessed a teammate bullying anyone. 2 incidents. 1. Someone flushed pig guts down the toilet on the 2nd floor after a biology lab. It wrecked the plumbing, and blood and sewage came raining through the drop ceiling over the special ed class. 2. Someone thought it would be funny to unleash a can of bear spray in the hallway at lunch one day. The entire school was evacuated to the football field in the rain. No one of authority knew it was bear spray, and so we were not allowed to leave the football field until they could determine the threat level of the biochemical weaponry unleashed in our small-town Canadian high school in the early 2000s. Anyone in the immediate vicinity of the bear spray was taken to the front parking lot, clothing removed, and hosed down with a fire hose in November. Their clothes were bagged up and taken to a lab for testing, and the naked students, and some naked teachers, were given basically poly sheets and told to sit on a couple of city buses that were commandeered by the local police department and fire department during the investigation. A hazmat team went into the school and found the bear spray. We all got to go home after that. Blood and sewage came raining through the drop ceiling. Oh no, over the special ed class. Oh no. It was a week more than a single incident. Middle school at a school for gifted children. First 2 or 3 of those geniuses tried to light the fucking forest on fire beside the school. They failed, but severely burned themselves in the process. Second, somehow a kid got run over by a bus. I don't know if I ever remember the details, just that bus service was cancelled and the kid never came back to school. Third, somebody spray-painted "MR rapes little girls" ask on the wall of the school. It was a girl I knew, and it turned out, apparently he actually did some really horrible shit with her, and then he killed himself. I think it was that weekend. There were so many assemblies and other things at the time. It's all fun and games until someone burns themselves, gets run over by a bus, and then helps expose a crime. Oh yes, the infamous mashed potato bowl incident. It was my sophomore year of high school lunchtime. The lunch at my school was always pretty subpar, and every other week they would make a mashed potato bowl that had lines going out the door. Everyone's in line itching to get their hands on a bowl when this rambunctious teenager, we'll call him Francis, cuts the line and swipes a mashed potato bowl. Kid in front, we'll call him Jimmy, pushes Francis and says, "Why the fuck you cuttin' bitch?" So Francis naturally proceeds with, "Because I can." "What the fuck are you gonna do about it?" Then pushes Jimmy back. POW Jimmy punches Francis and the brawl begins. Each fighter gets about 5 punches in when the school police officer comes to break it up. But Francis isn't done. Francis one punch KOs this officer and continues to fight Jimmy. Now some of Jimmy's friends come over to try and pull them apart, but Francis' boys come over and fight them. So now we have a 4v4 in the cafeteria, and everyone's going crazy. More police officers come and try to handle the situation, but the kids stop fighting each other and start fighting the cops. What the kids didn't account for though was the fact that the cops brought tasers. The cops tased a kid or two and arrested everyone else, bloody noses and all. We ended up getting an extra 10 minutes of lunch, which was nice. The LDR, Francis cuts line on mashed potato bowl day, madness ensues. I'm just picturing you sitting there, nonchalantly munching on your potato bowl, watching intently as this all goes down. In high school, it was discovered that thousands of dollars were unaccounted for in the school's funding. A week later, that number increased to $50,000 and then $100,000 and then $400,000, etc. It turned out that the superintendent of our district and his secretary had ended up embezzling millions of dollars from the school district. Upon further investigation of our superintendent, it was also discovered that he was living with a man in Manhattan while also owning a house in Las Vegas in which he lived with a male exotic dancer while claiming to be a widower whose wife passed away at a young age from cancer. Some of the details may be off since I'm recalling this from memory, but yay, that's the basic gist of our incident. Horrible car crash that killed a bunch of high school kids and maimed a few others. The car was overloaded and speeding and flew past a school bus carrying 6th graders and smashed into a tree right in front of the bus, and since only one person was wearing a seatbelt, all the bodies got thrown around the road and field as the school bus drove by, then stopped as all the kids on the bus flipped out. Police chief arrived at the scene and the only kid wearing a seatbelt was folded under the dashboard, and was his daughter. I could never work in emergency services for that exact reason. I don't even have kids and the thought is numbing to me. The battle of the sexes. The teacher got fired that day because of what happened. She was supposed to be monitoring recess. I'm not really sure what prompted this, probably nothing, but there was an all-out boys vs girls war. I remember swinging from the handlebars at the top of the slide and kicking a girl in the face. She dropped like 9 feet. Not long after 2 more girls came, each one grabbed one of my legs, and then just hopped off the ladder. I hit my jaw falling down and bit my tongue really bad. Lots of kids, including myself, had to go to the nurse. They canceled school that day and had a meeting with the parents the following week. In elementary school, some guy managed to stick a pencil up his eye. We were having reading time or something, when he was fascinating over the tip of the pencil, bringing it closer and closer until it poked his eye. He screamed for a while blood was pouring out. The principals ran to the room and the 3rd grade hall was evacuated. Thankfully the kid didn't go blind, but he was sent to the hospital in an ambulance. It was me, and to this day I still get made fun of for this. My 60-year-old French teacher, male and very unattractive, got caught having a full-blown affair with a 16-year-old girl 1 year ahead of me. She would hang out in his room during her lunch, which was always my class period, and they would flirt and stuff. Towards the end, before they were caught, she was sitting on his lap and playing with his hair. I called out that it was inappropriate and he said she was his granddaughter. She wasn't. He got arrested after trying to kill himself, and from what I've heard, she's doing much better. In my elementary school, the vice principal started sleeping with the principal's husband. It was a very small town, so word spread fast. The husband ended up leaving the principal, his wife of like 20-something years, and married his mistress vice principal. The principal retired shortly after, and the vice principal was so hated on that they ended up having to leave town. Small towns are fucked. Edit. This was almost 20 years ago. I did some sleuthing and found out that the cheating homewreckers are still married, and the principal moved back to Ontario and looks like she also remarried. Hopefully everyone is happy now. In my middle school, they sold this fruit punch drink that was called jungle juice. One day, two kids get in an argument in the cafeteria. It's pretty loud, so most people take notice and get quiet. One of the kids decided to just walk off towards the lunch line, and everyone thought that was the end of it. About 3 minutes later, he comes back with the thing of jungle juice and pours it on the other dude's head. Turned into an all-out brawl between the two. It was referred to as the jungle juice incident from that day on. At my university, jungle juice meant random alcohol mixed with whatever juice was cheapest at Walmart that week and the occasional roofie. One of the big 6 feet plus tough students who had a bit of a reputation as a bully and troublemaker decided he was going to try and intimidate one of the art teachers under the mistaken impression that just because Mr. Scott was only 5'5" in his socks, and about 55 kgs wringing wet, that Mr. Scott would be a pushover. He didn't know that before Mr. Scott trained to be a teacher, Mr. Scott was in the army, and whilst he was in the army, Mr. Scott was the divisional weight champion for boxing in Australia. He tried to push Mr. Scott out of the way, and when that didn't work, he tried to punch him. Mr. Scott punched him on the jaw and knocked him out. And before anyone says it was wrong, this was 1977, my school still had corporal punishment. Teachers could and did smack you round the head if you were being a dick. You certainly never ever laid a hand on a teacher. Talking back got you the cane or ruler. So that's why this was the biggest incident at my school. My English teacher served in both the Marines and Army in joint operations. A student tried something like this once. He just told the student, "If you're going to hit me, hit me." When the student did, he caught the punch and threw him to the ground. No one tried starting shit with this teacher again. My teacher was none of these. In fact, he didn't have legs, just prosthetics. Didn't stop him from slamming a linebacker against the lockers to stop a fight. Edit. I can't remember if 1 or 2 legs were prosthetic. My friend told me this story from her last year of high school. A girl got together with a guy who recently broke up with his previous girlfriend, and the previous girlfriend wasn't happy about it. So naturally they got in a very public Twitter fight, and the previous girlfriend did the obvious thing and tweeted a picture of the guy eating her ass and said something along the lines of, "How does my ass taste?" The tweet got passed around a ton, and I think the story made the local news, but I'm not sure. Eventually it got to the point where they arranged a time to fight outside the school, and when the time came there were cops waiting and nothing happened. I probably got several details wrong, but that's the gist of it. Edit. Just remembered a story from my high school. Our science teacher was known to be very flirty with the attractive girls, and I heard he was even in trouble at a previous school for something inappropriate happening between him and a student. Anyway, the story I heard that got him suspended, and later fired I assume, and charged with sexual assault was like this. Someone was walking through the halls of the school after hours and saw him in the science room with a student. The student, 17 years old, was sitting up on one of those science counter things wearing short shorts, and he was standing in front of her with his hands on her legs. Not sure if that's what actually happened, but he surrendered himself to the police. It was a pretty big shock, especially to my older brother, because he really looked up to the guy. My brother is really into bodybuilding and he and this teacher both spent a good amount of time in the gym. This teacher was really fit. Also, he took a girls' basketball team on a trip earlier that year. Not sure how that was allowed if the rumor was true about his previous incident at another school. Our teachers' unions where I live are notorious for their over-protection of teachers, so maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know anything about the law, but my other brother saw the same teacher on a bus about a year later, so I don't think he served time, or at least not very much. Edit 2, damn, this thread has a lot of content for our comment highlights. Comma, Edit 3, for the people wondering if these stories happened at their school, both stories took place in southern Ontario. Did the obvious thing and tweeted a picture of the guy eating her ass. Wait. Fuck, I'm old. When I graduated, there was 3 mobile phones in the whole school. We'd all sit around at lunch watching this one rich kid play Snake. A girl in our school just disappeared one day. Rumors that she was pregnant, etc. Some glitch in the system had her on the honor roll every semester. They'd call her name in assembly every time. Well, I knew her. She wasn't pregnant, just dropped out, and when I told her name kept getting called for honors, she thought it would be hilarious to actually show up and collect her gift cards. That was the prize. So she did, with a fake baby in her arms. Then spiked the baby on the stage. Damn, Jess, you were nuts. I dated her for a few years in college. It went as expected, but that's another story. The captain of our drill team was sleeping with the soccer coach. The soccer coach was married to one of the school counselors. Counselor finds out, calls the captain out of class, not unusual, and starts a huge screaming match in the middle of the English hall. The local paper runs the story with the student's name a few weeks before she was supposed to graduate. Awkward as hell when they called her name. Also, the counselor had to resign while the coach kept his job. Small town politics. 1. Our principal was cheating on his wife who has cancer, and it was another teacher too. He resigned, but as awful as this sounds, he did run the school really well. 2. Someone pulled the fire alarm during a really intense bout of snow. Literally every other school district around us closed, but we just had to be that one district open, and it was glorious chaos. It was impossible to control everyone, and we were all out for about 45 minutes just going wild and flinging snowballs and rolling down our school hill. I live in Texas, so sometimes snow is really hard to come by. When we came back and we were all soaked, my teacher was a particular hard ass and he wouldn't let any of us go to the bathroom to dry off. It was worth it though. At my first high school, it was when the student body president got caught growing marijuana in the school greenhouse. The second high school was when a freshman got his hand caught by one of the blades in a pug mill, clay mixer. They had to cut it apart to get his hand out, and then he got airevic'd to the hospital. I think he did regain partial if not full functionality to the 3 fingers he nearly lost. Westboro Baptist Church showed up and picketed across the street from my school. One of the girls in the grade below me had died in a car crash, and they decided this was God's way of punishing my state for allowing domestic partnerships. They were supposed to protest at her funeral, but the fire department was already on it and had put giant sheets up around the church for the service. They came to the school instead. This girl was loved by everyone who met her. She was such a good-hearted girl. Even the teachers were mad that WBC was there. Edit, picketed, not pocketed. A dildo was superglued to a bronze statue of our mascot, Go Patriots. This wasn't just your average dildo, it was a massive black one you'd see in some crazy ridiculous big dick porn. Now this third leg of a dildo hung from the statue right where it should have been, for a few periods before it started getting a lot of attention. The best scenario began to unfold as our much-hated principal left his office to take a gander at the hilarious prank. Infuriated, and a little on the hefty side, he was known to get red-faced and sweaty when he got angry, which was a lot. In rage, he grabs the black dildo, trying with all his might to jerk it off the statue, and some unsung hero snaps a picture of him in the act on his or her phone. The picture spreads like wildfire, and by the end of the day most of the school had a picture of our heaving, sweaty principal jerking off a dildo on a statue. That night an email was sent out to the parents of all the students to let them know there may be inappropriate pictures of the principal on the students' phones and serious consequences would happen if they weren't deleted immediately, but the damage was already done. For our senior prank, a few students actually grappled up to the roof of our 4-story high school, then rappelled down into the library courtyard, broken with keys that they had stolen from the janitor, and proceeded to fill the entire hallway to the ceiling with books, blocking off the main pathway between the school. One of them stupidly went to their locker and the camera was able to identify them from the locker they went to. Edit. Apparently the version I heard was slightly off. I'm sure there are many versions of the story, but here it is from the source. I was one of the 4 who did this, not the one who got us caught. PM me if you want proof. Let me straighten some facts. No keys were used whatsoever. The exterior doors in the courtyard were not locked from the outside, so we just walked in. No one visited their locker. The dummy who got us caught wore the same jacket to school the next day. One of the teachers recognized it from the footage of us walking through the school. Then while he was in class they opened his locker and confirmed it was the same jacket. He confessed when they brought him in. As much as I wish we had rappelled down, the several-story climb we had to do was easy because the building is set up in sort of steps. So we only had to drop down level by level. I have a friend who got expelled for planting a keylogger on one of the administrative computers in high school. Changed everyone's grades in his senior class to A's. Apparently they had no backups or else he deleted them, because he helped a couple people graduate high school that day. I believe he got caught after attempting to retrieve the keylogger by rappelling through a skylight. Edit. I can't remember why he had to go back for the keylogger. It's been a while. I can't remember if he thought it would be tied back to him or what. I think if they found the logger they might have been able to look through security tapes of who had physical access to that computer and found him out. Sorry I don't have more details. Edit 2, it was a hardware keylogger. Software KL is kind of infeasible in this situation. Wow. He really might have changed a bunch of lives for the better. Idiot kid who doesn't take HS seriously will really appreciate that diploma 20 years later. No kidding, the glass panel on those diploma frames is the perfect size for busting up lines of below. I knew a guy who did this on a smaller scale. One teacher kept all of her grades for the class on a floppy disk. When the teacher went outside for some reason he got up and ejected the floppy disk, lifted up a panel of the particle board shielding and threw it to a corner. She never found the floppy and everyone passed. A group of guys went to another school's gym, climbed the roof and made a little fire while smoking and hanging out. Meanwhile, the tar roof started melting and the little fire actually burned through the roof they were on. So while they're looking at this small fire they've got going, the wooden frame under them starts catching fire. By the time they noticed it was already too late and the whole gym burned to the ground. 2 of the guys went to my school and got caught. Since they were underage, their parents were held responsible for what I remember to be $2 million in damages. The guys weren't bullied afterwards I believe. I think everybody just felt bad that their lives were so screwed for something they just didn't think through. We played your team in volleyball and got a rousing chant of your gym burned down during a game. The middle school I went to used to be the high school for our district before we expanded. The following story is one of the most epic senior pranks that I had ever heard of, and lives on in infamy through teachers and students alike. Late one cool Friday night in the fall, 3 students decided to pull off the prank of all pranks. Parents were in bed, the city asleep. They sneak out and head to the local Frisch's diner. Using their own strength and ingenuity, they pull a statue not unlike this static Flickr webpage into the back of a pickup truck and haul it off to the school. The students then use a system of pulleys not already in place, take it over the roof of the school, and into the courtyard in the middle. As the sun rises on Saturday, the pranksters dig a hole and place the statue inside. Using a concrete mixer they also pull it over, they mix up a batch and pour it over the base of the statue. Exhausted from their work, they go home and crawl into bed. Monday morning comes around, and there is a whisper turning into a roar at the school. Standing in the courtyard, in all his large, burger-holding glory, is Big Boy, goofy smile staring into the chemistry room. Maintenance is called, and they have no idea what to do. It's too heavy to carry, and since the school was locked up, they don't know how it was brought in. Eventually, a jackhammer is used to break up the concrete, and the metal dividers in the doors are taken out. Maintenance and teachers unite to carry Big Boy out of the school and return it to its rightful owners. To this day, it is still unknown who pulled off the legendary Big Boy prank. All that is known is that all Frisch's restaurants in the area now bolt down their statues into giant concrete blocks to deter any copycats. Edit. Public education done taught me good grammar. Edit 2. In case anyone doubts the lack of things to do in Ohio, check out how many times these statues are stolen in the comments. We have nothing better to do. Junior year. A sophomore boy put a sealed container of chicken noodle soup in an empty locker next to the chemistry room. It sat there for months, easily 5 or 6, until somebody thought about it again. It was brought up in chemistry class, 11th grade, and our chemistry teacher took a pair of tongs to the locker and planned to dispose of it once and for all. His hands were too shaky that day, and as soon as he lifted it out of the locker it fell, spilling the entire cesspool that the chicken noodle soup became. He immediately ran back to his room, screaming, "Oh God! Shut the doors! Shut the doors!" And hilarity ensued. The smell was indescribable. Raw sewage, rotten chicken, fermented noodles all mixed into one. I have never and probably will never smell anything remotely close to it again. The smell permeated the entire floor and even seeped down a stairwell next to the spill to the classrooms immediately below. The day of the disaster everyone gagged as they traveled through the halls. Luckily it happened during 8th period, last period before we went home. A hazmat team was called to take care of the spill, just in case there were airborne diseases. For the rest of the school year, the teachers lit candles in the hallways and in their classrooms, but the smell never left us. It stayed all summer and even into the next school year until it finally went away altogether. The chemistry teacher who dropped the soup is actually now my stepfather, and we recount this story at least once a year and laugh our asses off. It is one of my best memories of high school. How'd that happen? Last bit. Edit. You have 8 periods. We have 7 max and now I'm in 6th year. I have 4 maximum. Edit 2. I get it, your high school had 9 periods lol. Edit 3. I am not in 6th grada, haha. My mother dated him for a few years after she graduated high school and they broke up. Then she met my father and they got married, had kids, etc. When they got divorced, she met back up with my chem teacher a few years later and they've been together ever since. Cool dude. Back in middle school, someone pooped in a urinal. This probably wouldn't have been such a big deal if this hadn't happened. Kid asks to go to the restroom. He leaves. He comes back to class 2 minutes later, right in the middle of an important lecture by the teacher, and literally the moment he gets into the door he shouts at the top of his lungs, "There's a turd in the pee thing." It's been 14 years and I'm still convinced I haven't yet laughed as hard as I did that day. One of my friends brought a gun to school, because he was having problems with some kid. The other kid was in a gang and he feared that he would be jumped or worse. So he decided to carry it in his jacket pocket at school. So, he's sitting in the first class of the day, starts messing with it and it goes off. Everyone reacts to the noise, but apparently no one figures out what it was. It was a small .22, which isn't super loud, but I'm still baffled till this day. The bell rings and everyone continues on to their next class. Later that day a girl shows up to the nurse complaining of a burning pain in her lower back. Turns out she was shot when the gun went off. The cops are called and everyone is called back to the classroom. They figure out that it was my friend who had the gun. He was arrested and ended up in juvie. About a year later I'm leaving school and I bump into him. I say hi and ask how he's doing. He says he's doing better and then asks if I want to buy any weed. I tell him I'm good, and keep walking. This was over 10 years ago, and I haven't heard about him since. I hope he turned things around. Side note, a few years later I ended up working with the girl that was shot. She had a gnarly scar where she was shot. Apparently it required surgery to remove as it had done some internal damage. Some chick was shot and didn't realize what it was till later. I know it's a .22 but still. We had a very similar incident occur at my high school sophomore year. Kid is supposed to fight after school, is scared of being jumped, brings a gun to school in his hoodie. Third period, he's in the home sciences, cooking, classes, gun goes off in his pocket, he runs out of class. Teacher thought it was a firecracker, reports the missing student to the administrative staff. Cut to about an hour later, me and my friends get locked into the cafeteria on a 95-degree day with no central air conditioning and huge windows letting the sun directly in. Turns out the kid had shot himself in the thigh, ran about 10 blocks to the hospital, and dumped the gun on the way. The nurse naturally called the police when she realized it was a gunshot wound, per our state law. By this time our school resource officer has caught wind of the situation, so she responds to the call. Officer realizes the gun is missing. Immediately the school is put into lockdown until they can find it. At the time he hadn't told them where it was, so they weren't certain that it wasn't still in the school. 4 hours later, they found the gun, and finally released us to our parents from that god-awful oven cafeteria, which had reached 120 degrees by that point. The most unfortunate part of the whole incident is that the rumor of him shooting his dick off ended up not being true. TLDR, kid shoots himself in class, school tries to serve us for lunch. A teacher slept with the principal. The same teacher also hooked up with a student. The principal found out somehow and used another excuse to suspended the student. The shitstorm reached catastrophic level when the teacher barged into the principal's office and went crazy just loud enough for everyone within a 2-mile radius to hear. Edit, guys, sorry I meant principal, though he ain't my pal. I won't correct the typo, though, based on principal. While I was in HS, I think we got on the news 5 times. We had lesbians named Homecoming Kid and Queen. This went national. A teacher got arrested on campus for going into his wife's classroom. They both taught there, and cursing her out and shit. They were both always on some sort of drug. Make teacher was fired. Wife was not, she still works there. They are still together. A teacher wouldn't let a kid go to the bathroom but she had a bucket in the closet. Kid went in the closet to take a shit. Teacher got sued and fired. Our campus security guard was arrested on St. Paddy's Day for stealing the drunk bus at the bar that takes drunk people home. We had a sit-in senior year because so many teachers were being fired that we all sat outside and sat for like an hour. Local news stations came and it got big. A lot of teachers' jobs were saved. Edit, St. Paddy's Day. One thing I don't understand is why the kids let teachers tell them when they can or cannot use the toilet, especially in high school. If I seriously had to go and the teacher told me no, I got up and said, either I'm going here or in the restroom, you decide, then walked out without an answer. It's only happened twice and I got detention one time. But staying 45 minutes after school was nothing compared to the embarrassment of shitting my pants in class as an adult. Also, they like keeping their jobs so they give in fairly easily without the theatrics. I was a pretty normal, relaxed kid, and tried to stay out of trouble, but sometimes you gotta go. Freshman kill day. The very last one at my school, because of an incident I witnessed. A buddy of mine filled a balloon with Hershey's chocolate syrup and lobbed it at a group of freshman girls who had become well known for thinking they were hot shit and treating everyone else like peasants, including upper classmen. The balloon took the alpha of the group dead center on her chest and sent the chocolate syrup everywhere. Not a single girl in the group was spared. It just so happened that the alpha girl was wearing an $800 Angora sweater that she borrowed from her mom, and it was utterly destroyed. Her mom raised a stink, but the school couldn't pin it on anyone, so the only response they felt was available to them was to ban freshman kill day pranks. Youngish, around 30, history teacher, married with infant daughter, caught having an affair with a senior student. It was kept hushed for a while, quiet resignation, nobody really knew, until the local paper made it a front-page news story. There legally couldn't be anything done because she was above the age of consent and said yup, consensual. It was just ethically a very scummy thing to do. He obviously couldn't show his face in the school again, so he left and I believe became a financial planner in NYC or something like that. But what pissed off a lot of people, taxpayers, was that he left in December and got paid throughout the end of that year and the entire following year. Someone tried to burn down our high school and a whole wing was destroyed. A guy in our year was expelled for it, but a couple of years back, I bumped into him and he totally denied it was him. He even said he knows who did do it but kept quiet at the time so as not to break some misguided code. He seems to be doing okay with his life now, which is surprising. I mean, imagine how he would have had to explain that when he started looking for a work. Ho ho ho, this is a good one. The school play that year was You're a Good Man Charlie Brown. One of the special ed kids got an anonymous note from a girl saying to meet her in Snoopy's doghouse for a blowjob. Naturally, he did. A teacher found them mid-fellatio, but it wasn't a girl. It was a sophomore guy who had put on a wig and stuffed water balloons in his shirt. He was relying on the lack of lighting and the cognitive deficiencies of his victim to pass for a girl. So that was the incident. To this day I have difficulty looking at Snoopy's doghouse and not thinking about it. Senior year a few years back, we are all sitting around in our second period class if I remember correctly. I come from a Christian town on the side of the highway, and I could almost promise you've never heard of it before. Anyways, we used to have a vice principal no one liked who took over when the principal left for another school. One day after the VP turned principal made his announcements, the little chime came back on again. Silence for a couple of seconds. I'm sure most of us thought he had missed something, but an unfamiliar voice came over the intercom. How would you like to suck my balls, Mr. Vice Principal? You could hear the echo of laughter throughout the entire school. They never officially caught the guy, but everyone knows who did it. One of the troublemakers took the fall for him and everyone remembers them as the guys who did it. There was also the time that someone put a bunch of chickens on the theater stage which was shared with the lunchroom and they shit everywhere. What a senior prank that was. Edit. Wow, I was not expecting this much upvotes from this. A little addition for you guys. This was in Texas. Not sure if my username gave that away or not. My town is relatively boring so everyone found ways to entertain themselves. Can't say I was much different. I was the weird kid who went outside and filled in paint chips on his jet ugly with paint filler when I was on breaks. Thanks for your upvotes. This was early 90s. After my junior homecoming dance everyone was hanging out on the sidewalk in front of the gym where the dance was held. The cops came to disperse everyone and while they are telling everyone to move along one of the black kids threw a rock at them. So instead of them going after the kid who actually threw the rock, they just grabbed the nearest black kid and threw him on the ground. So homecoming queen runs up to cops and says you've got the wrong guy. X was the one who threw the rock. Then the rest of the kids in the area start agreeing, yelling you've got the wrong guy. Instead of cops letting innocent black kid go they doused the crowd with the large crowd control pepper spray. Pandemonium ensued with kids running around screaming and vomiting everywhere. I thought it was funny the local newspaper reported it as a race riot, even though everyone maced were white kids sticking up for the innocent black kid. They did drop the charges against the kid though eventually. My brother hired a call center to call every home number of each student at the school and tell them that school was closed for the first half of the day due to a gas leak. So practically no students showed up until lunchtime. The school did an investigation that they posted, and because my brother used a call center in Israel, the official investigation literally set our lid on the culprit ended in the Middle East. When I was a senior in high school, there was a junior girl we will call S that had gone to a party and gotten very drunk. She ends up leaving the party with her friend and some guy. S and the guy get in the back seat and start fooling around in the back of the car while the friend drives them home. S was wearing a dress at the time and the guy in the back seat began fingering her. I guess she had also smoked a bunch of weed on top of all the alcohol and has lost control of her bowels. As the guy is fingering her, she diarrheas all over the dude and all over the car, basically scarring everyone involved for life. There's an old pumpkin farm outside of town, with hay rides every Halloween. A senior was caught fucking pumpkins out there. To make the holes, he used a power drill with a bit that I imagine was his girth. The theory goes that when the sun shone on the pumpkins all day, it left the insides warm, but anyways, he was caught by the owner who had noticed drilled holes in some of his more curvaceous pumpkins. He called the police. This kid was a Letterman's athlete douche, so everyone in the school ganged up on him. We all called him the pumpkin fucker. Year or two later he brings home a girl to his town for Thanksgiving. They're at a restaurant same as me. While she went in the bathroom, I went over to him and did the quick catching up thing, congratulated him on his hot college girlfriend, but added as she came back from the bathroom, "Yet, she's got an ass like a pumpkin." I went back to my table and watched him sweat bullets for several minutes before leaving. Update: Google search shows there's more of this than I thought, at least in porn, but no one in a small town 12 years ago knows that. Elementary school, a kid tried sliding down the banister of a stairwell, ended up falling 3 stories, broke a metric fucked in a bones, tried to blame it on me and couple of other classmates when he got back to school. Middle high school, one of the odder kids in my grade would always snap and freak out at people. Once the teacher was giving him shit for not bringing his glasses into school, so he threw a binder at her head and took off. 5 minutes later we see him calling us across the football field with our principal chasing after him like a bat out of hell. Another time he stabbed somebody with a pencil, then came at the teacher with it during shop class. Good times. College, a bunch of tennis players kept getting in trouble for sexually assaulting girls at student dances. Wicked weird group of people. The biggest one was my sophomore year. 2 students a year ahead of me, I think, they may have been seniors, got into a fight outside my homeroom. One stabbed the other with a butter knife and the kid died. It was then that I realized how racist many of my fellow students were, and as a result pretty much ceased associating with most people in my school. Runners-up include our principal, getting straight tackled for trying to break up a fight before school by a student that wasn't even in the fight. I guess he just didn't want it to stop. Guy hit him so hard they slid across the floor together. It was pretty hilarious. My senior year, the aforementioned principal died, and at graduation they placed a life-size cardboard cutout of him from the waist up in one of the chairs on stage. It was much creepier disconcerting than they meant. In the late 90s, a gang rose in our school. They bombed a nearby coke factory. One day, they decided to vandalize the gymnasium, but the band instructor was after school and caught them. He threatened the gang with punishment the next day. To avoid the punishment, the gang conjured a brilliant idea to show up to the band instructor's house and shoot him once in the face, then again in the butt because they said he was gay. The band instructor died, and we now have a bench dedicated to him in the front office. We had a few of things happen at one of the HS I went to. 1. We had several bomb threats for a few weeks. 1 a week, at least. Luckily they weren't real, and it ended up being time spent outside in the safe zones until we were all cleared to return into the school. We had a payphone in our cafeteria. Most of the calls came from there, but no other way to trace it. Most of us students knew who was doing it. No one ever told. They were just messing around and not really a threat, but I always think about how much more scared I think I would be now that things like this actually happen frequently and aren't kids just fucking around. 2. Some kids poured old pesticide down the toilets. The shit spread throughout the entire plumbing system and the whole school smelled horrible. We were evacuated, sent home, and hazmat came. No one got sick, thankfully. 3. My really good friend was sleeping with his best friend's mom. He was 15, she was 37. She got pregnant, they got married. He went to juvie, she went to jail. They lost custody, of course. She gets out of jail, they get back together and have kid number 2. Still don't have kid number 1. They split up a few years ago, but for like 8 years they had a marriage. She even gave birth to the first kid in jail. 4. English teacher was fired for having a class of 9th graders read and do a book report on a book where a kid jacks off in a tree house. She got in deep shit, and it made the news. All because some kid told her mom and her mom flipped about it. It wasn't that bad. It just touched on the subject of him jacking off for a second and then moved on. It wasn't like it was the whole book. They really overreacted on that one. And last, I didn't go here when this happened, but the above stories happened at a different HS than this story. I went there too, just not at the time of this incident. Two girls get into a major fight after school. They are out by the buses and shit is getting worse and worse between them. A bus is coming to pull up and pick up the kids to go home. Girl 1 sees the bus coming, so she pushes girl 2 in front of it. The girl gets ran over and dies. Girl 1 is arrested and charged with murder. Yep, crazy shit happened at schools I went to. Lol. In middle school, junior high, like 7th grade, there was a guy who no one in our grade liked, not because he was socially awkward or annoying, literally just because he was an asshole. He was mean to everyone he talked to, even his friends. He had stuff going on at home, I'm sure, but we were middle schoolers. We were also assholes. We didn't care. He was making paper airplanes and throwing them at people in his class. One of my friends catches one of them out of the air and rips it in half and throws it away. He goes and sits back down and the asshole comes up behind him and stabs him in the head with a pencil. My friend proceeds to stand up and shove his head into a wall so hard he broke his nose. They both got suspended. Asshole got sent to special programs. Prior to that event, my friend had been kind of the nerdy kid that no one liked. I liked him. He became the hero of our school. The LDR, asshole throws paper airplanes. Nerd rips up airplane. Asshole stabs nerd in the head with a pencil. Nerd breaks his nose. Edit. Adding more cause I'm remembering more. A girl goes to the police officer that works at our school and says that she knows about a drug dealer on campus. She's furious, saying things like, I won't allow stuff like this at my school. You need to arrest him. He needs to be expelled. He investigates, finds drugs on the guy and arrests him. 3 weeks later that girl was arrested for selling drugs. She used the officer to get rid of her competition. The LDR, snitches get stitches. Before I came to my high school, like back in the 90s, there was a heroin epidemic where like 11 kids died from OD in 2 years. It was bad. The band had their school trip cancelled for a few years because on one of their trips, in the middle of the night a bunch of them gathered in a hotel room and had an orgy. They were caught and all were required to call their parents and tell them what happened. Our rival high school, as their senior prank, came to our campus, drug all the ducks out of our pond and killed them. Hung them all over campus, from the trees, put them on doors, on the sidewalks. We now have a week of school commemorating them called Duck Week, where we sell T-shirts with ducks on them and stuff. Kind of a weird way to commemorate it. The LDR, killed our ducks man. We found our teacher's mugshot for a DUI on Google Images. No one liked her and she showed up to class more than once in a club and dress, hungover. Go to a party. Host is fucking a random guy in the living room with like 30 people in the room. I went to a fairly tawny all-boys school that had this club for your most likely to succeed types, led by a prestigious area judge, called Lancers. I was never a part of it myself, as PlayStation 1 and a lifelong love affair with slacking. Anyway, the big joke about Lancers always involved the judge, boys, all of the showering that they do together, etc. I have no idea about the circumstances. The other thing that we had at this school was the senior speeches. Anyone that wanted to do one could go up in front of the entire upper school, and they'd give a roughly 15-minute speech. I'd to see above. The year after I graduate, this one student who was a prominent member in the club gets up, and keep in mind the judge is there in the front row for this, and he outs the judge. Confirms all of the rumors about impropriety, showers, young boys, all of it, while the guy is in the room. The speech ends, the judge gets up, and promptly goes home to blow his brains out. In 6th grade, 3 elementary schools merged into one middle school. The elementary school I came from was in the city, small town, so not really a city. Another school was from bumfuck Egypt, middle of nowhere. It was almost as if the country kids had never seen a person of different skin tone before. About 2 months into school, some kids started to talk shit on one another about their appearances. Well, one day after lunch a fight broke out. I'm talking 30+ kids beating the snot out of one another in the main hallway of the school. It wasn't exactly white versus black, because most of the city kids had plenty of friends who were black, racial etc. Anyone who was standing by and watching was subject to beatings. I'll never forget seeing kids getting blindsided by fists, tackles, and textbooks. It took quite some time for the administration to sort out the whole ordeal and find all the perpetrators. In the end, the kids from the city school beat plenty of country bumpkin ass. ELDR. We had a race war in 6th grade. Some students got found in the bathroom with a pound of weed. Literally a pound. A teacher paid a student to use pictures of him on Kik so he could create an identity to talk to underage boys. Members on the track team sexually harassed a freshman in the locker room. Edit. Today the first bit of news I saw was that there was a fight club in my school. NY Daily News, we are currently unavailable in your region webpage. I know this is long, but this is some good shit. I accidentally became a mem in my 4,000 student high school after I was served a Category 3 suspension, 21 days, for hacking. It started when I took a VB class my sophomore year. It was my first time doing any real coding outside of HTML, and it really opened up a world of possibilities. I got bored with binary conversion stuff and decided I would create something interesting. As a kid I thought, wouldn't it be funny cool if I tricked people into giving me their Windows passwords? There was a few seniors in my VB class that constantly bullied me, so I figured this was a good way to get back at them. I recreated the Windows XP login screen, and set it so that the login button saved the username and password onto my network drive. It worked gloriously, except the kids in my class weren't dumb, so they would press Ctrl+Alt+Delete and realize it was just an app running. I found a VB script that restarted the computer, and called it whenever someone clicked login, so they reboot right back to the real login screen and not realize I had just stolen their password. To my surprise, it also disabled the CAD prompt, so even the techie guys didn't realize they were being baited. No one was able to tell anymore and my product was complete. I assumed, a major Windows vulnerability using a stupid restart script in a phishing app. I was ready for the adrenaline. I went to the library after school and logged into all 10-20 computers, loaded my app, then quietly took a computer in the corner and quietly watched. By the end I had a notepad file with 30 username password combinations. I even got passwords for some teachers. I felt like a god. I then logged into my bullies' accounts, and deleted everything. Essays, homework assignments, whatever. Back then itm.com was really popular and CS kids would use it to make fun of each other. It's basically a site where you can create a page using a GIF loop and audio up into hilarious effect. Anyway, I got a picture of the worst of the bullies and used Dennis Leary's I'm an Asshole song as the backdrop, and then I put a link to that page in all of their network drives. The next day in class everyone was quiet. I felt the tension in the air and I couldn't have possibly been more smug with myself. I quietly sat down and did some work. I heard some whispering and then one of the guys started talking to himself. Fuck, my essay is gone. I started to feel bad at that point, but there was no turning back. Everyone knew it was me, but nobody said a word to me. The YTMND page I made quickly got around and my point was firmly made. The shenanigans didn't end there, but to cut a long story short, I later hacked the network admin password by brute forcing the SAM file so I could unblock Flash game websites. Through all this tinkering I didn't realize that I unlocked a network drive that only me and the network admin could see. I used it to store files when my own drive ran out of space, which obviously raised suspicion. He went through my drive and found a list of passwords, a program called SAM inside, and a bunch of other shady apps I created during my run. I was fucked. After an emotionally grueling interrogation by my asshole vice principal, they suspended me for 21 days and banned me from playing sports. Lol. I had been a straight A student my whole life and broke down thinking my life was over. Hilarious in retrospect, but I was a total mess. A week after my suspension, I'm chilling at home and a friend IMs me. "Dude, you're famous." "What?" He sends me a dozen links. Word got around in the school that I hacked the school and people made websites in my honor. Free Aaron, Aaron for president, justice for Aaron. I became a meme and the whole school knew me by face. My picture photoshopped on picket signs and billboards in solidarity. Even my bullies came around and we all became good friends. When I came back from school after 21 days, everyone was expecting me. Random people waved to me in the hallways and I was still in a shock and in disbelief. There were flyers of me plastered in computer labs and in random corners in the hall. That was the incident that everyone talked about for years until I graduated. Edit. The fame quickly died down. No, I didn't get laid. No, I didn't get a job at Google, and if anything I was scared shitless from ever tinkering again, unfortunately. I also never particularly thought I was a hacker during any of this, since in one case it was phishing, and the other involved getting a hidden file and running it through a program. I definitely felt like a hack though. Yes, I got into college fortunately, but never did computer stuff with the same enthusiasm. I'm a consultant now. This was one of my first posts on Reddit, edited for clarification. I did some terrible things, but perhaps the worst was that I held my tongue about someone who did something far more terrible, for no reason other than my own amusement. In high school gym class we had tiered locker baskets where each row belonged to one period. So, for example, if you were in third period, there were 2 lockers above yours. I knew the guy whose locker was above mine and he used to fuck with my locker in various ways, sometimes leaving a big gob of applesauce on my lock, sometimes drawing on the numbers with a sharp, etc. Finally I got fed up with it, so one night I jacked off into a film canister and the next day I drizzled my cum all over his lock like maple syrup. I couldn't help but brag to the horrified people around me as I performed the awful deed, so naturally word got to him about what I'd done and it really pissed him off, so he said he'd get me back for it in a big way. Later that week something weird started happening in the locker room. It smelled horrible, and it wasn't just the collective stench of 40 adolescent boys. It smelled like rotting meat. I asked the guy if he knew about the smell and, with a dubious grin, he told me he had placed a slab of raw venison in one of the lockers. His family was wealthy and they regularly went deer hunting, which might seem pedestrian in other places, but in San Diego it's not common for a person to have a dead deer in their freezer. He wouldn't tell me which one it was, but he said it was near mine and he had bought a new lock just to use on the basket the venison was in so that nobody without the combination could open it. At first, the other guys in the locker room thought it was hilarious. We'd hold our noses and squint and talk about how nasty it smelled, but that didn't last long. The thing about rotting meat is, stuff marinates in its smell. We kept our gym clothes in the locker room, and before long our clothes started smelling like it, and then our bodies started smelling like it. People started losing their patience. Fights broke out in the locker room more and more often. Kids were generally pissed off that they had to come into the locker room. But since the coaches didn't know where the smell was coming from, the meat remained untouched. They couldn't go around indiscriminately cutting off people's locks to find it because people owned those locks and they'd have to be reimbursed. So for about 2.5 months that meat fermented in the locker room, and whenever the coaches demanded to know if anyone knew anything about it, I just held my tongue, partly because I didn't want to get snitched and partly because I'd become fascinated with the effects the smell was having on social life in the locker room. Finally, one day, we reached the tipping point. It started with a shoe. I was changing my clothes when a shoe landed next to me. I thought to myself, someone from the row over must have lost their shoe. So I tossed it back, but it came right back at me, a lot harder this time. Everyone in my row made eye contact, and the battle began. You know how a locker room is set up, with different aisles and a bench running down the center of each one. Pro tip, it makes them a perfect venue for trench warfare. Shoes started flying hither and thither. Then people upgraded to deodorant cans and whatever was in their backpacks. Once they'd exhausted that supply, they started throwing their master locks, at which point the fight officially became dangerous. We slammed up against our lockers and covered our heads for dear life. Then people started literally tearing their lockers out and throwing those. Finally someone picked up a big trash can in the corner of the room and hurled it overhead, do the right thing style. I swear, for that moment, everything seemed to go into slow motion. Trash rained down over all of us as we looked up and up. Expended deodorant cans, torn boxer briefs, and empty water bottles rained down over us, and I couldn't help but believe that this torrent of squalor and debris was a metaphor for us, what we'd become, what I had unwittingly made us. Once word reached the administration, we spent the next straight week running laps around the football field. At this point, the pay teachers realized that conditions were going critical, and started indiscriminately, and illegally, cutting off everyone's locks to get to the source of the smell. When they finally found the locker basket in question, which, it turned out, was the one right next to mine, they threw it on the ground outside of the locker room. We all crowded around to get a look inside at the source of our despair. Whatever was in there, it had been meat once, but it wasn't anymore. It was a reddish, blackish paste that had congealed on the walls of the locker. It was covered in these. I don't even think I can call them maggots because I genuinely cannot believe maggots can grow to be that size. They were about as big as my thumb. The inside of the basket was stained with this meaty slime, the legs of which should never have left its place in the porta-johns of hell. Some people couldn't help but laugh hysterically at the sheer grotesqueness of it. Others could only hang their heads in immediate relief. I have to confess, despite how my nostrils welcomed the change, I was very disappointed. I missed the degradation of humanity that occurred every day at 10:30 a.m. in that locker room. That 5 minutes each day when the normally content looks of those 40 faces turned into contorted visages of agony. I missed what I had created through inaction, and I remembered that old mantra about all which is necessary for evil. Maybe I was just an innocent bystander who refused to take action, and everyone else was collateral damage for unjust punishment that a villain exacted upon me. Or maybe I was the villain all along. TLDR, I knew about a rotten venison conspiracy and did nothing about it because it was fun to watch everyone else squirm. Senior year of HS, starting football player is allegedly getting it with a married kid in the same school. Teacher, the yearbook school newspaper photographer geek, a Jehovah's Witness, who doesn't like said teacher is on the case. Said Fatma gets wind that the teacher has written a love letter, seriously, to the football player, who in the middle of class tears letter into little tiny pieces, say, 300 of them, and dumps them into a garbage can. JW Geek goes to the classroom where the letter was thrown away, gets every scrap and spends a day or two taping EVERYSCRAP together, and it is damning. Embarrassingly damning. Salacious details, teenage desire, from her, descriptions of body parts, graphic depictions of past, extreme, for the time, this was late 80s, sex acts, the works. Does JW Fatma keep it to himself? No. JW Geek makes copies, maybe 100, and on the day he shows up to distribute them like watchtowers, gets them confiscated by the principal, who is trying desperately not to get the school into the news. But he didn't get every copy. The original makes it around to enough hands that the grapevine does everything else. Letter discovered on Monday, take together Wednesday, copies confiscated on Thursday. Friday, there is a pep rally in his gym. And this was the incident. At the gym, all the football players are lined up, getting cheers, rah-rah yay. So the little skit they put together, which usually has teachers involved in shooting free throws against team captains, or showing up in their alma mater's football jersey and having people line up with them in order of popularity or some such, took a turn for the surreal. It's the district championship that night, we need spirit. This time, the teachers come out each one in a white trash bag with arm and neck holes cut out, one for each letter of the town's name. It's got a long name, so there are 8 teachers in all. Each teacher has a football player in front of them, lined up purely at random, each player with a whipped cream pie. I'm watching this as a team captain, from the side, and I am horrified to see that the football player in question has somehow been lined up right in front of the teacher he was banging, she with a big A on the front of her garbage bag poncho. The only thing missing was that it was not red. Then, in some truly cursed alignment of the caprice of Eris in the wrath of a righteous YHWH, it is announced that whichever pair gets the loudest cheers, that player will throw the pie into that teacher's face. They are dead last in line. As they go to each pair, only underclassmen that are clueless and those that knew nothing about the no cheer. It is unbelievably quiet, not quiet for a pep rally, quiet for the library. 7 sets of feeble and half-hearted cheers happen. I am so thrashing and screaming inside, sunk into all the nightmarish works of existentialism and Russian justice literature, because I see this like a plague, spreading to a lethal denouement. Last pair, he is looking like he is about to have to kill his childhood dog with a claw hammer. She is crying blatant, bitter, shameful tears, too late to repent. Nobody can stop this, because it was all set up before any of this happened. I was in on planning committee. To stop it would be an official acknowledgement. The show must go on. And it did. The principal, also crying but choking it back, stands behind the star-crossed lovers, holding his hand over the strapping young man that is watching his soul be stripped of him, and the room explodes. 700 kids scream their throats into spasms, screaming for blood, for entertainment, for revenge against teachers, for just the hell of causing hell. The pair is the obvious winner, these losers, and without any more of the hesitation that his brawny chest could no longer hold, he throws the pie, fastballs it really, hitting her dead in the front of her skull, creaming shut her face. She turns, wiping whipped cream from her eyes in a tragicomic parody of his semen that she wrote about loving have on her face, bawling. The principal is crying, the player is crying, she is dying, in public, covered in his cream in front of 700 yelling, laughing, mocking teen voices. She is on fire, she is shattered, she is dying in front of my eyes. And as she turns, starting to lower her head in a way that she will keep lowered for the rest of her life, there is JW photographer boy, camera right at the ready, and takes the shot that still sits on one of the back pages of my yearbook. An agent of God there to record is in her guilty shame. The kid that hated, that worked so hard to elucidate their guilt, that I think maybe prayed to God that brutal justice be done and then got the chance to stand and deliver it, caught it perfectly. He was a rather good photographer, wound up shooting for AP later in life, and the black and white print he hand-developed was a masterpiece of action, pathos and crushing omniscience, a record that won't be forgotten until every yearbook is dust, and the people that remember it are, too, me. I was the yearbook editor. I couldn't not put it in. I had to. I still know everyone involved. She quit teaching, got divorced, lost the house, and her son would never talk to her again. The football player went to college. Everybody moved on. Sort of. But I didn't. I sometimes want to ask someone if that really happened, if it really went down like that as a so perfectly horrific a morality play. But I don't need to. I know it did. I was there. I couldn't have made this up if I wanted to. And I wouldn't have wanted to. It was 10th grade in the middle of winter. It was snowing out, so everyone was hoping school would let out early. Right at the time the administration makes the announcement, the vice principal comes on the intercom. We all got so excited because the only time this has happened it was to announce an early closure. So, we are all getting ready to cheer when the vice principal starts advertising for the cafeteria's delicious chicken patties. This became known as the chicken patty incident. I guarantee you he knew exactly what he was doing, put down the microphone, and laughed his ass off with the principal and the front office staff. When I was in elementary school, one second grader stole his dad's military pistol and was using it to shoot some soup cans in the schoolyard. The cans he had stolen from the school kitchen. He didn't get to fire many shots as the teacher, obviously almost immediately, came and took the gun away from the kid. The principal gave him a lecture and called his dad to come and pick up the gun. The dad was obviously very angry. Nothing more serious followed. This was back in the day when boys were boys and nobody had heard of any school shootings. Went to boarding school and we had a tight-knit friend group within our house. There were maybe 8 of us, and had 4 rooms to share. We found hidden files on my friend's laptop that had pictures of my other friend getting change that he'd secretly taken from his phone. Also, thousands of pictures of girls and boys from school that he'd lifted from Facebook and turned into his personal wank bank. Needless to say, he's not my friend anymore. He started a new life and changed his name to my friends who he took pictures of and we learned was in love with. I managed to track him down after 5 years, and he told his new friends we bullied him and planted stuff on his laptop to get him expelled. What a cunt. When I was in 6th grade, a deer jumped through our classroom window and went ape shit. We were having a perfectly normal day and then someone pointed out that they saw a deer on top of the hill on the other side of the street. Everyone was amazed and the teacher thought it was a pretty elegant moment. Then it started going down the hill at an alarming pace, and then across the street, and then closer and closer. By this point everyone had their noses pressed to the glass, thinking it was going to just come really close and say hi or something, and then in the midst of its frenzied dash, it leapt through the window, breaking glass everywhere, getting cut to all hell. All the students panicked. We were all rushed out of the class and animal control was brought in. We were there for an extra 2 hours or something until the situation was handled. I think the most satisfying moment was when the popular smart good at everything kid was crying because he had left his retainer in his desk and he thought the deer was going to eat it and he was going to be in serious trouble with his parents. 2 kids obtain shrooms, spread word, create list and phone of potential shroom buyers. 1 kid loses phone with said list, administration comes across phone. 1/3 of the senior class is suspended expelled 6 weeks before graduation, and 12 kids out of the 260-person class had already been expelled for weed-related offenses. Also, a kid that got caught smoking a blunt in front of the school after hours got away with it because he had just gotten into Harvard. There were a lot of other smaller incidents involving my class, like hazing on freshmen, stealing final exams, and stuff like that, but the shroom bust was without a doubt the incident. Administration told us that we had been the worst class in a while. We had this girl, she was rather large, and very, very unpleasant. So anyhow, one day in French class, we were playing this game that was kinda like Simon Says, where the teacher would say something in French and you'd do it. So it's this girl's turn, and the teacher says, "Touchez la fenêtre, touch the window." So this large block of momentum sets off in a trot to touch the window. I'm not sure exactly what happened, or how, but she went from jogging to the window, to tripping on her feet, to getting a solid foot up into the air, and sailing straight through the fucking window. First story, so she was totally fine, but this poor Asian girl next to her got some bad shards. Class was totally silent except this one kid, who was laughing like a hyena. The girl stuck around for a few months, but people would shout "touch her la fenêtre" in this slow drawn-out voice at her whenever they saw her. She withdrew later. Kinda sad, but mostly funny. She was an awful person and it made for a good story. So this happened at my school in about 1972. I know this story because my uncle was the main perpetrator. So picture a private boarding school in England. The night before the last day of his final year, my uncle and his mates sneaked out of the boarding house. They went to the music department, and nicked several of the largest amps and speakers, and a record player. They climbed onto the roof of the 8-story, 6th form building with all of this equipment, and at the stroke of midnight, blasted out Alice Cooper's "School's Out" as loud as possible. This of course woke everyone in the school and local residents in about a mile radius. But wait, there's more. As they started the record, they were already climbing down from the roof. With all attention on that distraction, they ran round to the front of the school where one of the housemaster's 1969 Mini Cooper was parked. They then picked it up, doable with 8 people, carried it into the porch atrium bit of the school's main entrance, turned it sideways and put it down. That way, the only way it could be removed was to pick it up again, turn it back the right way round and carry it back down the steps. My uncle was then called into the headmaster's office on the morning of his final day at school, expelled from the school and forbidden from stepping foot on its premises for 10 years. The greatest irony? My uncle has just retired from a long and happy career as a teacher. When I was a sophomore in HS, another student, we'll call him Randy, wanted to run for ASB class president. To do this, You needed to get approval from all of your teachers stating you're an upstanding student or whatever. So Randy seeks these approvals, and gets to one teacher that tells him no. A quick background of Randy. He's kind of your stereotypical white douchebag. Expensive car, Minidisc player just as they came out, etc., etc. No was clearly not something he heard often. So this teacher telling Randy no, set him off. Instead of brushing it off and figuring out a better solution, Randy decides to put dry erase spray cleaner into this teacher's coffee. The teacher drinks it and starts to gag, an ambulance is called, and Randy is of course expelled from school. It even hit the local news. If I can find a video or article about it, I'll post it here. A year or two later, my dad and I are at Best Buy getting some widget or another that I can't recall. I have school outerwear on, and a person next to us engages us in conversation. Him, do you go to high school? B, yeah, I like it. Him, my son went there. B, oh, when did he graduate? Him, he was expelled, his name was Randy. B, Pentirian pause, in my mind, oh shit I know this guy. Him, yeah, they really shouldn't have expelled him, that was way too harsh. B, Pentirian pause, in my mind, your son fucking poisoned a teacher. B, well, looks like I need to get to the cashier, have a great day. TLDR, Randy decides to poison a teacher because he didn't get what he wanted. I meet his father, and no surprise he's also a douchebag. Town was jumpy after an elderly couple was murdered, some minor things were taken, but the real valuables were left alone. The couple was well respected and had no known enemies. Is some random weirdo on the loose? The killings were vicious. A week or two went by, no leads, no serious suspects. In history class, we always had time set aside for current events discussion. Someone brought up the murders. We all talked about what we heard through the grapevine. As we rehashed and speculated, one of my classmates says no, that is not right at all. The police aren't considering X, Y, and Z. Our teacher looked horrified and shocked for a split second. A friend and I noticed, but almost everyone else was just arguing their theories and points. Mr. Dryden suddenly gave us the rest of the hour to study for an upcoming test. He excused himself from the room briefly and tried to act nonchalant when he returned. Within 10-15 minutes of his return, about 5 policemen walked in the classroom and led the kid who had volunteered X, Y, and Z points away for questioning. He confessed and was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Holy shit, this inspired me to create an account. 1. A girl in a sped class had a rather nasty habit of throwing her bloody tampons at people. This kid had a great arm, by the way. She would be a gift to MLB if she wasn't, you know, retarded. But anyway, she chucked her bloody little package at the dean, and her mother argued that she shouldn't be expelled because she didn't know any better. 2. A girl in the 9th grade was caught fucking her boyfriend in an empty classroom. The boy was like 17, and the girl was 14. Anyway, there was a huge shitstorm about this, even though the school was pretty ghetto and these types of incidents were not altogether uncommon. The mother of the boy, who I'm fairly sure is a long-lost relation to the mother of number 1, did not believe the school when they told her this. Her reasoning: he's a good Catholic boy, he ain't like that. Lady, Jesus didn't bone his 14-year girlfriend in Mr. Baker's 10th grade English classroom. They did it in the chapel. What are you, new? 3. Someone was Hitler for Halloween. 4. Kid shot his neighbor's cat and skinned it. 5. Kid was caught making out with his cousin at a party. Don't know what he saw in her. That girl was fucking dumb. This will be Barrett, but I'll type it anyway. I have got quite a few. One time, some poor bored sod scribbled school shooting on February 3rd on his chemistry table at the end of January. Someone found it and everyone panicked. I have never seen so many police forces in one place. Our music teacher was iconic in those days. When the police paid our music class a visit to instruct us on how to act in case this was really happening, he had just finished his speech on how we should attack any possible attacker. His theory was that rather than do nothing except being shot, we should attack them and maybe lose 1 or 2 students, but win the fight in the end. He was completely serious about it and told the policeman about his plans as well, which, quite frankly, shut them up for a good 5 minutes while they were trying to process what they had just heard. Another time one of my classmates got hit by a car in front of our eyes. He was trying to cross the street with his bike. The car came around the corner and saw him too late. He survived because he was wearing a helmet. We all wore helmets every time we used our bikes after that. I still don't ride my bike without wearing one, even though it's been 5 years since then. One guy in my year tried to show us how he could bend his sports glasses without damaging them and broke them. I'll never forget the stunned look on his face when they snapped. My art teacher, painted. He literally licked his brushes in front of us and told us what it tasted like. I am not making this up. This really happened, I swear. It was the kind of teacher that shows you how to do good sketches with a pencil on your sheet, then make you try yourself. At the end of the lesson he would gather everybody around a table, look at the sketches, get to your sheet, discard all of your sketches, but tell you you did an extremely good job with one of them. Yep, that happened too. I moved across the country, and on my current school, my RS teacher sent her tutor group outside, because, and I quote, God was talking to her. Again, I swear I'm not making this up, we talked about it for months. A teacher at my school lost her child during pregnancy, came back to school, cried a lot, got pregnant again and is now on maternity leave. A teacher in a high position had sex with another teacher, who was actually in a relationship, made her pregnant and married her. She's not teaching at my school anymore, but is. I have this teacher who is addicted to caffeine. He often leaves the classroom during the lesson to get another coffee. When I asked him if he could get me one too, he just did it and everyone kept talking about it for ages. One of the chemistry teachers triggers the fire alarm on a regular basis by causing explosions during the lessons. She also let me have a beer in her class and is probably the best and most awesome teacher at my school, not only because of the beer, but because she's brilliant. My last physics teacher was so boring that people would literally fall asleep in his lessons. One of the German teachers went on a class trip with my tutor group. On that trip, made a walking race on an underground platform, which he allowed us to record. He tried during that race and fell and we've got it on video and it was the #1 topic in our year for a few days. Edited the spelling. Also added some more stories. I went to a very competitive state girls' school, routinely ranked the highest in the area, but also generally dissed by the private schools. Beautiful people who were very driven, no pranks, no antics, nobody who didn't want to be there, but harmonious to the point where fucking nothing ever happened, until one assembly. The assistant principal is up on stage. I have something very serious to talk to you about, she says. She gives a bit of preamble. Then, someone has been defecating in places they are not meant to. Someone was smearing their shit in random places. In bathrooms, on mirrors, doors. We colloquially referred to them as the poo bandit. Favorite quote from the assembly. Do you girls have any idea how embarrassing it was for me to call the janitor specially to clean up human feces? Edit, I accidentally humble bragged about my old high school. Hopefully it's fixed so it just works in with the story. I went to one of those schools where you have to sit an entrance test to get into. Thousands try, only 200 succeed. The average student ranks in the top 3.4% of the national cohort. This doesn't add much to the story apart from what could be perceived as a brag.